So hi, haven't done a video in a while. I just kind of do these when I think of something, I hear things in the wider discussion of Bible stuff, and I just kind of want to throw in my own 2 cents on it. You could either you take it or leave it, whatever, it's good. But so people have been talking lately about how to talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament, because calling it the Old Testament seems like it might be uncool to Jewish people, saying like, well, your thing is old, the Christians have the new, we're better, we're the best, and that causes problems. So there's some people that call it the First Testament. That's not a bad idea. There's other people that call it the Hebrew Scriptures. That's not a bad idea. As I think about it, calling it the First Testament, then maybe we could call it the First Testament and Second Testament, but that doesn't sound right, because really in the New Testament as we know it, it contains a discussion of the New Covenant. I like calling it the New Testament. I also can see how this idea of calling it the Old Testament is maybe somewhat uncool. So how do I think about this now? I think what people don't really realize in the wider discussion is that there's an old covenant and a new covenant that the Bible discusses. Well, at least the so-called Protestant evangelical Bible that we have. The Old Covenant is 613 laws of Moses, brought down from Mount Sinai. Well, I mean, he brought the 10 Commandments down, then the 613 were developed as the society went. This is a contract between God and Israel and them only. This contains the 10 Commandments. This was not something for Gentiles, which is everybody who is not of the Hebrew line of humans. It was for them, for a specific purpose that is addressed in the story of what we call the Old Testament. The Old Covenant and the Old Testament are not the same things. The Old Testament is a narrative discussion of all the hows, whens, whys, whats, what happened, what didn't happen, why it was good, why it was bad, all discussing the Old Covenant. The New Testament discusses the New Covenant. This is a covenant that Paul says, and the writer of Hebrews, which people don't know if Paul wrote it or not, but the writer of Hebrews says that the Old Covenant became obsolete when the new one came into place. When the story of Jesus, he died on the cross, supposedly resurrected, came back to life. When Christ died and came back to life is when the author of Hebrews says the new covenant came into effect. Just like the Old Covenant is contained within the Old Testament, the Old Testament discusses within itself the Old Covenant. The New Testament discusses the New Covenant. What is the New Covenant? How does it work? What does it do? Is it good? Is it bad? Blah, blah, blah. The New Testament and the New Covenant are not the same thing. The New Testament is a discussion of what the New Covenant means after Christ died and rose from the dead. So here's the rub. If we are going to say there's a First Testament and a New Testament as divided in our Bibles today, we have a little problem, because the Old Covenant discussion goes into parts of the New Testament, namely the first 4 books that we call the Gospels. This is a somewhat of an interesting dilemma of the break in the Bible that we have between the Old Testament and the New Testament, because the discussion of the Old Covenant goes into the New Testament. When Christ was born is not when the New Covenant started. Christ's life and ministry in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John As we know from Galatians 4:4, you can look it up, Jesus was born under the law. Jesus was born under the Mosaic 613 law constitution of his tribe of Hebrew people between him and God. Gentiles were not a part of this. When we say Gentiles were not a part of the first covenant or the old covenant between God and Moses and Israel, when we say Jesus was a part of that, he was ministering and teaching to those people in his lifetime. He was not ministering or teaching the new covenant. 85% of what Jesus talks about is the old covenant, addressing it to his people, Israel. 15% of what Jesus says is forward-looking, alluding to what's going to come in the new covenant, alluding to how life will be. But 85% of it is not for Gentiles. This is so important. I can't even express how much this changes everything. How much it changes how we view Christian history, how we view Christianity today, how we view how all of us who grew up in Christianity were affected. Because the words and teachings of Jesus, as he's teaching the old covenant, are meant to produce and do produce much anxiety and guilt. Why is that the fact? I mean, why do we all know from going to churches that it's all about guilt and our anxiety and that we grew up with and that I was in for 40 years myself? Why did that happen? It's because the old covenant was supposed to produce guilt. It was a barometer. It was laws and rules. It was to say, can you do this? Can you not? And if you can't do it, you fail. This is not the economy of the new covenant. So if in Christian history, what has gone down is people saying we have to follow the Sermon on the Mount, we have to follow the teachings of Jesus because that's Christianity. It is not Christianity. What Jesus was teaching was the old covenant of the Mosaic law. How did this get lost in Christian history? I have no idea. I think it's because pretty much humanity started kind of paying attention to people that were getting this inaccurate, and it just snowballed. That's my personal opinion. It snowballed, as you can see it in what are called the so-called early church fathers and mothers that just went with this theology. They went with it and it built and it built and it built, and then this is what we have today. We have the opportunity to change this. This is why I spend my time talking when I'm not even sure if anybody's really listening, but just trying to get the discussion going, because it is of monumental and massive importance for those of us who like the Bible. If you don't like the Bible, it's fine. I'm not here to make people like the Bible. What I'm here to do is talk to the people who do like the Bible and question if we have it accurate or not. And if we don't have it accurate, how can we change it? And we should change it if we're not accurate. Okay, I want to sum it up even though I've gone super long, but if you've stuck with me, what I want to say is that the Old Covenant has generally thought to have stopped at the end of the Old Testament, and then the New Testament and the New Covenant start with the birth of Jesus in Matthew. What I'm trying to say is that that is not accurate to the biblical writing and the structure and adherence and flow and logic of the biblical books themselves. The logic and the structure and the internal way that this book is held together is that the old covenant of the Mosaic laws it starts in the Old Testament and it goes until Jesus' death, not his birth. Please read the book of Hebrews. If you don't believe me, the new covenant starts at Jesus' death. And then the whole New Testament is a discussion from Acts to Revelation of what this new covenant means, how it works, what it is, etc., etc. And it is very, very, very different from the old covenant. The book of Hebrews is making this point. It's very different. What Christianity has done in summation is mix the old covenant into the new covenant by thinking that the teachings during the life of Jesus were meant for everybody who's a Christian, and we're all supposed to do our best to follow it. What happens when we do that? Then we take on the anxiety and the guilt that was supposed to be produced under the old covenant for only the nation of Israel and not Gentiles, but now we have massive amounts of Gentiles who have put themselves under the guilt and anxiety of the old covenant being taught by Jesus. And it has made a massive mess worldwide. And I think that it can be and needs to be straightened out, and it pretty much is being straightened out. Is people like me are talking about it, trying to do our best to point this out. Much too many people who are not very comfortable with this, and I can understand it. When I first started to think about these things, it was distressing. It was hard to swallow at first. I was kind of angry. I threw books across the room. When I talk about these things, I try to be sensitive to other people that also have this reaction. I'm not trying to say this is easy to understand, but I do believe it is accurate. And I would rather live in a world where we have an accurate idea. If we don't like the Bible and we don't like God or we don't like Jesus, let's at least be accurate about what we don't like. Let's not be saying we don't like something that's inaccurate. That's not helpful to anybody. All right, so I guess that's enough for now. I've gone super long, but I really hope this helps some people, and hopefully this will create a discussion. If not, just, think about it, and we'll see what happens going forward in the future. All right.